I was no Marie Antoinette.
400 cars, 3,000 pairs of shoes for the ex-beauty queen wife.
I don't think anybody ever thought that the whole political problem in the Philippines would end up in our backyard.
The plunder of the ages.
If you've ever wanted to know what a revolution looks like, feast your eyes on Manila tonight.
They basically fled the country. This was their home now.
Do you still consider yourself president?
Of course. I don't resign.
And all the while millions of his people lived in filth and disease, Marcos and his family lived in glittering splendor.
It was totally divisive, and it hurt the community a lot.
They knew how to manipulate.
Till now, about martial law, any place, anywhere. And we were the only state that were celebrating martial law.
So, well, they consider him like a local boy, who made good, who cared for them, who became president, who did a lot for Ilocos Norte, where he was. So there's that kind of ethnic, maybe even feudal kind of relationship. It's like a master, a slave kind of relationship.
Former University of Hawaii professor Dr. Belinda Aquino has written many publications about what she calls the plunder of the ages.
He ought to be brought to justice. He ought to be punished for his crimes. He was the head of a regime that had killed lots of Filipinos, made about 10,000 Filipinos disappear over a number of years.
During that era, even as millions of their people lived in poverty, the Marcoses enjoyed the good life.
Land, skyscrapers, and stock literally around the world. A personal fortune estimated at $5 billion. Nearly all of it siphoned from the Philippine treasury. U.S. presidents bankrolled Marcos because he was an ardent anti-communist who let the U.S. keep vital military bases in the Philippines.
In the midst of the Vietnam War, America was worried about the spread of communism in Asia.
As I stand on American soil and I see the doubts rising in Asia, I see another phenomenon that clears my mind. It is the phenomenon of an American nation led by a new leadership, earnestly exerting heroic efforts in order to stop the slide.
So in that spirit, let me offer a toast to the President, Mrs. Marcos, and to the people of the Philippines, and to the mutual respect, the dedication to peace and security in the world, and the shared values which unite us.
Your relationship as the first couple of the Philippines has been described as a partnership. Do you see it that way?
Well, I wouldn't say to that extent partnership, because the presidency is always in the lead. The First Lady is only there as a helpmate and someone who is supportive to whatever is the need. I would describe it perhaps that he makes the house, and I hope to make it a home.
And she knew that without him, she couldn't have the luxury or the power. And you know, sometimes I think it's quite unfair that they only sort of associate luxury and the finer things in life to her. And you know, she actually did a lot of good things for the country, and that's the part that you never hear about. And so as much as she had the glamour aura, you know, there were some things that was very close to her heart, and so you just never heard too much about that.
Well, frankly, I feel that Marcos should have stepped down sooner than now. I mean, it's pathetic that we had a demented president for so long.
When the economy he and his cronies were accused of plundering collapsed, and when Marcos loyalists were widely believed to have gunned down opposition leader Senator Benigno Aquino, the president's legitimacy was finished. In 1983, just minutes after returning to the Philippines from a 3-year exile, Aquino was assassinated at the Manila airport. He was the political rival of President Marcos and spent years in prison on charges of subversion. Aquino's death, for which the Marcos regime was blamed, ignited the People Power Revolution that led to Ferdinand's downfall. In 1986, violence in the streets, accusations of cheating, and the dodgy human rights record led Marcos to call for a snap election. To the surprise of many in the Philippines and around the world, he lost to the late Senator Aquino's widow, Cory, a defeat Marcos was not willing to accept.
The final hours of Ferdinand Marcos at the presidential palace in Manila. Thousands of loyalists cheering the failing dictator who was soon to be told by his American friends to cut and run. Scenes faithfully preserved by his personal camera crews, as they'd done countless times before. When Marcos fled, the palace tapes remained behind, an intriguing and potentially incriminating collection. Hundreds of hours of recorded history broadcast to glorify the deposed dictator. Hundreds more hours of private tapes yet to be seen or analyzed by the new government. Extravagant parties on the presidential yachts, decadent by the standards of this Catholic nation. First Lady Imelda Marcos dancing last fall with then U.S. Consul General Vernon McCanich. The First Lady giving presents to the Catholic hierarchy at the palace last Christmas. The world saw Marcos welcome General Fabian Baer back to the fold last fall after the military was acquitted in the murder of opposition politician Benigno Aquino. But the palace withheld these pictures of the ex-president greeting the other alleged conspirators, one of whom has again been accused as the killer of the new president's husband. In many ways, the Aquino murder was the beginning of the end for Marcos, coupled with the economic disaster he and his cronies created. Disaster and despair measured by the growing number of people who find their daily bread in the garbage dumps. And that is why this party aboard the presidential yacht will interest the people too. A birthday party last September for daughter Irene, the last time Marcos was aboard the vessel. Ferdinand Jr., nicknamed Bong Bong, governor of the family's home province, is the man in the flashing bow tie. There was food and dancing and live music, including the revelers' version of a song that last year was a rallying cry to feed the poor. This version is memorable for its enthusiasm. Memorable, too, because the former First Family and their friends didn't realize how hungry their own people were. Hungry for political change at the very least.
What kept coming up was that they were betrayed.
Emmy Tomingbong worked in Hawaii as a TV reporter and was able to use her connections to get exclusive access to the Marcos camp.
They couldn't believe that America would come in, step into their country, and of course America's interest was all the bases, and that they would go to this, extreme to remove them. And so I'm not saying I felt sorry for them, but this was, a very major development that they had to live with for 7 years. The closest thing that, the president said to me was that he trusted the people around him. And looking back, he wished he could.
The nation took to the streets tonight to celebrate its victory. The dictator had fallen, the people conquered his palace. For a generation, it had been the forbidden city in the Philippines. Tonight it was renamed Freedom Park. If you've ever wanted to know what a revolution looks like, feast your eyes on Manila tonight.
But, you know, the Americans were intervening in that whole situation. We'll give him asylum, and just so we will not have any kind of violent situation there. After all, Americans were so proud about the Philippines having been a showcase of democracy in the Far East.
As troops loyal to Marcos filed out of the palace, they were embraced as converts by the gathering crowd. There was pandemonium as word spread that the dictator was gone. There was bloodshed, very little bloodshed. The day that started with 2 presidents and 2 sides ended with a coming together that mingled prayer and patriotism, which tonight were the same thing. They waved their flags, they kissed their flags. The Virgin Mary was everywhere. They tore down the barbed wire surrounding the palace and fashioned it into crowns of thorns. The stately portraits of the old regime were replaced late tonight by Hollywood-type posters of the new leaders, the new Philippines, starring Corazon Aquino, who tonight spoke with the voice of her nation.
We are finally free, and we can be truly proud of the unprecedented way we achieved our freedom, with courage and with determination, and most important, in peace.
It's to the credit of Filipinos to have pulled that revolution on a 4-day timeline, which is considered the shortest revolution in history.
This is about as happy as people can get. This was the revolution that smiled.
I don't think we really knew that we're going to end up here someday. At least I didn't. In fact, it was rather chilling for me to think that I knew this person as president, and now he was stripped off of everything and living with us in Hawaii.
For anti-Marcos forces, developments in the Philippines appeared to bring them one step closer to victory. They say that after 20 years, they are no longer the underdog.
We're not the opposition in Hawaii, but very soon we're going to be representing the establishment, the Philippine establishment, because things are changing so fast.
The revolution led to confusion here in Honolulu, as the pictures of Ferdinand and Imelda still hung at the Philippine Consul General, air travel was disrupted, and families huddled around the TV set on edge.
If this were a newspaper picture, the caption might read, Imelda and Ferdinand in happier days. They were here in Hawaii, and it was 1 year before the assassination of Benigno Aquino. During their official visits here, local Filipinos have been bussed into events as a show of support. About 3/4 of island Filipinos have ties to Marcos's home province of Ilocos. There has been absolutely no word from Philippine or American or local officials that Marcos has made contingency plans to come here. But speculation is rampant here that Honolulu would be his first choice as a new home.
Because he will feel at home here, because there's a lot of Ilocanos, a lot of Filipinos here in proportion with the population in the United States.
But then when they were driven out of the palace, Reagan promised them, if they come to Hawaii, they will live in heaven. So when they arrived in Honolulu, Reagan did not do anything. And so Mrs. Marcos, every time we had meetings with Mrs. Marcos, President Reagan was telling us we will live in Honolulu in heaven, but we are living in hell.
When Ferdinand Marcos stepped off the plane at Hickam Air Force Base, he was a man without a country, cast adrift in a hostile world, desperately searching for an outstretched hand after fleeing a country he once ruled with an iron fist.
Marcos fled to Hawaii with his family and friends, landing on Oahu in February of 1986.
Only news people and security personnel waited for Marcos and his party this morning at Hickam Air Force Base. Nothing like the throngs of cheering supporters that have greeted the Filipino leader in his previous visits here. The 89 people traveling in the Marcos party made the trip from Guam in an Air Force C-141 that touched down just after 11 this morning. The official greeting party was small. Governor and Mrs. Ariyoshi and Commander of the Pacific Air Forces, General Robert Baisley, and his wife. A frail-looking Marcos needed some help deplaning, but once off, the 68-year-old president in exile was able to walk slowly by himself. There was a warm greeting between the Ariyoshis and the Marcoses, the welcome complete with leis. Later, Ariyoshi told reporters he found Marcos to be in good spirits, relaxed and hoping to get some rest here. He did not think Marcos was depressed or bitter.
I didn't get that from him. I didn't get the feeling that he felt bad about having to leave the country and being almost stripped from the presidency. I think that he feels that he was happy that things happened without any real bloodshed. He was concerned about Filipinos being turned against Filipinos and lots of bloodshed, and he did not want to see that happen.
He said the Marcoses left in haste.
The son, for example, pointed out that he didn't have very much the clothing, and one of the daughters indicated to me that that was the only clean clothes that they had.
And they got obviously permission to come here, but it's a new place for them.
Jim McCoy was a local reporter assigned to the Marcos beat.
There was a number of people that supported them here, and there was a number of people that opposed them here. So it was a big story, you know, for weeks and months.
My beloved countrymen, I'm now in Hickam Air Force Base.
With that, Ferdinand Marcos, his wife Imelda at his side, read what he described as a letter to the Filipino people. It contained Marcos's version of his downfall. He never conceded losing control of the country he ruled for 20 years.
This situation came to a point that although I had control of superior military power and several opportunities to employ this military power, the employment of such an overwhelming force, no matter how legitimate, would have resulted in the bloody carnage among innocent civilians.
We got the word at some point during the day that they're definitely staying in Hickam that night. So that's when I decided to make a call. I had a very good source in federal law enforcement who I presume was there, and he was there. And that's where I said, anything interesting happened? And he told me about the jewelry and the Pampers boxes. Now, I remember calling the newsroom and saying, do we have video of Pampers boxes coming off the plane?
It was reported today that Marcos and his group arrived in Honolulu carrying large amounts of cash, gold, and valuables, and that more items, including land titles and stocks, arrived today from the Philippines.
But we heard that President Reagan was not happy about, you know, the Pampers and the jewelry in the Pampers boxes, because it was like, kind of like, it was about, you know, well, they're fleeing their home country, but they're bringing all the loot with them, you know, that kind of thing. So that was part of it too.
The group that's been known for months as the Friends of Cory Aquino has changed its name to the Coalition of Concerned Filipino Americans in Hawaii. Some of their leaders gathered to hear Marcos's comments today. They didn't like what they heard. They called it a charade.
We had sort of hoped that he would have the wisdom to move on to another place where his presence would be less divisive.
Had questions been allowed, Marcos would surely have been asked about the personal belongings he brought to Hawaii. Some reports indicate Marcos may have with him as much as $4 million in various assets, which coalition members think he may use for political maneuvering.
So you can assume that he has the ability and the resources to bankroll a movement, that would probably undermine the Aquino government.
By the time they were exiled, the Marcoses were estimated to have amassed assets worth anywhere between $5 to $10 billion. They are now famous for holding the Guinness World Record for the greatest robbery of a government. Much of that fortune is still missing, and that's led to a decades-long legal battle for Honolulu attorney Sherry Broder, who's still trying to recover the money.
I told my husband, can't we sue him, for human rights abuses? And my husband was a law professor of international law, and this was really his field. And he said, yeah, we can. And so we decided that we would do a case if there was a plaintiff that was interested. So we actually had talked to Belinda Aquino about it.
Aquino informed government officials in Manila about the money and goods allegedly brought here by Marcos. She says the head of the Philippine Commission for Good Government immediately hired a Honolulu attorney to try to impound the goods. Belinda Aquino, in turn, was named presidential designate to represent the Commission on Good Government here in Hawaii.
To look into the hidden wealth or investments abroad made by former associates of Mr. Marcos, as well as Mr. Marcos himself in the United States, of which there is ample documentation.
People power becomes panic at the palace gate. A mad rush to get in and see what Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos left behind. Today was the day of the poor. Manila's slum dwellers summoned by President Corazon Aquino to see the extravagant lifestyle of the palace. Aquino has refused to live there.
It is really sad that the previous occupants neglected the needs of the Filipino people.
Filipinos who used to be kept blocks from the Marcos' private universe got a 20-minute kaleidoscope of unimaginable luxury.
Wow!
Including the former First Lady's 10-foot wide bed.
That's why a lot of people here in the Philippines are starving.
Fantastic. Ray Reblora and his wife Sally often go to bed hungry, trying to live on their $17 a week income. Their first baby is due any day. Their palace, homemade out of scrap, is smaller than Imelda Marcos' bed. As far as Ray is concerned, the Marcoses belong in jail.
He can come back here in the Philippines to face what he do to the people of the Philippines.
Ray and Sally's wardrobe consists of a few extra shirts. They were stunned by Imelda's storeroom of 2,700 pairs of shoes and hundreds of designer gowns. The anger is compelling. So many people were trying to get in today that children were in danger of being crushed. The government said that from now on, passes will be issued to hold down the number of daily visitors to the bitter exhibit of Marcos memorabilia.
Well, let me tell you one story, and maybe it'll give you a good idea of how we were able to try to chase down money.
The 1899 artwork by French Impressionist Claude Monet is at the center of one of those fights to find the funds.
On the day that the Marcoses were overthrown in the Philippines, you know, somebody came with a U-Haul to the apartment up in the Upper East Side or Upper West Side of New York City, and supposedly all the paintings that were in there were loaded in the U-Haul and taken away. Nobody had ever seen them again or knew where they went or what happened to them.
Then the Monet painting suddenly surfaced. It was discovered that Vilma Bautista, a confidant and personal secretary of Imelda Marcos, sold the painting. She got into trouble with the law for not paying taxes on the deal.
She then claimed that Imelda Marcos had given her that painting. Of course, she must have been quite an excellent secretary if she got a $40 million gift. So we immediately got involved in the whole dispute going on about who it belonged to and who it didn't belong to. So in that particular situation, the buyer of the Monet painting settled with us.
Then there was the jewelry, which is still to this date a point of contention.
It's a wonderful collection. It has a huge variety of pieces. There are some truly exceptional items in this collection.
The jewels discovered in those now infamous Pampers boxes has become known as the Hawaii Collection, containing diamonds, tiaras, bracelets, and gemstone necklaces. It is worth millions. The collection has been locked up in a bank vault for decades, but that's about to change. After years of legal debate, the Philippines government now plans to auction off the collection in an attempt to reclaim the ill-gotten gains. Current President Rodrigo Duterte, who was reportedly allied with the Marcoses, okayed the sale in 2019. He had canceled the initial auction after taking office back in 2016.
I was no Marie Antoinette. I was not born to nobility.
The Marcos family denies any wrongdoing when it comes to the Treasury's theft. But if they didn't take it, where did the money go? And how did they get so rich? Imelda has struggled with that question in many interviews.
If some pieces of land he would buy for 1 peso. Today it's 2,000 pesos. So even that, things like those appreciate. And then you buy, 25 years ago, I bought a piece of land worth 30 pesos. Now it is 3,000 pesos. 21 years ago, 22 years ago, I bought a piece of land, 50 centavos, and now it's 300, 500 pesos. If you have good investment, things like that work more. But people do not think that things do, as I said, even age appreciate.
Imelda has made claims that the bulk of her husband's fortune originated from an elusive buried treasure known as Yamashita's gold, but the loot's existence has been dismissed by many experts. Cut off from their deep pockets and stuck in a diplomatic limbo, back in 1986, the Marcoses struggled to find a place to call home in Hawaii.
The former Philippine president arrived at 5577 Kalanianaole Highway around 8:30 last night. It was the first time Marcos had left Hickam Air Force Base since he and a party of about 90 arrived here from Manila 27 days ago. Last night's move was made with the assistance of Secret Service agents, U.S. Air Force personnel, and plainclothes officers of the Honolulu Police Department. And it didn't take very long for the first protesters to arrive. Honolulu attorney Eric Seitz and a friend showed up with protest signs less than an hour after the Marcoses moved in.
Frankly, I've always been offended by the United States support for Marcos, but I'm even more offended by the fact that he's here in Niu Valley, or that he isn't being sent back to the Philippines to face the legitimate feelings of the Filipino people, who I think would hang him if he were sent back.
Marcos moves into my neighborhood, something clicked, and I said, that's too much, that's it, I gotta come out with my sign, I gotta show everybody I oppose it, he's a murderer, he's a dictator, he's a fascist, what can you say?
Secret Service here? Hey, cut it out, I'm going with you. Stop it!
Seitz was detained briefly by the Secret Service because his protest sign included an indirect threat. He was taken into the house and questioned, but later released without charges. It's not certain how long Ferdinand and Imelda planned to live in the 4-bedroom beachfront house, but they were clearly running out of time at Hickam Air Force Base. They had been promised security and housing for up to a month. They're on their own now in a rented home, but the security remains in place. Efforts to find the Marcoses a safe haven in another country have so far been unsuccessful.
Not everyone saw the Marcos regime as an evil dictatorship. In an attempt to capitalize on that support, the couple began to make some rare but dramatic appearances around Honolulu.
They have a name for themselves, these people who carpooled and rode buses and walked to a street corner in Old Kalihi, where the president of the group Friends of Marcos has a travel agency. They call themselves the Silent Majority, Ilocanos with ties to Marcos's home province in Ilocos Norte. Transplanted Filipinos who say they have until now quietly borne the indignities of exaggerated and false reporting about their hero.
Oh yeah, they always take time. They would not leave until the people leaves. Oh yeah, because this is the first time that the Filipino people see them. And of course they like to see them, and of course they like Mrs. Marcos and President Marcos would like to see them too.
Most media really in Hawaii are all for Aquino, pro-Aquinos, not all for Marcos at all.
The wealthy, sure, that's a president. I mean, who doesn't? President Reagan lives in the White House.
Nobody, how much you poison our mind, we are still loyal to him. He's the best president the Philippines has ever had.
It was a crowd that Imelda Marcos knew would be more than receptive. She wore the same simple dress that she wore when she and her husband faced the cameras for a news conference at Hickam, and she offered herself for press the flesh populism. The crowd surged forward to envelop her in support, to comfort her. And when the crowd pressed too close for comfort, supporters moved to protect her, targeting the big TV news cameras first.
Well, I think for her it was maybe a level of comfort that she can amass this kind of reaction outside of her own country. So, you know, I mean, all you're doing is playing it on a smaller stage, but it's the same routine. And she was always genuinely very open to her people.
She was helped onto an old table and the crowd saluted her. She was not there to talk with reporters, but Newsroom 9 got in a couple of quick questions in the highly charged atmosphere.
Mrs. Marcos, could you tell me how you feel to be in this country? Homesick. Very homesick. Do you have anything to say to Filipinos here who feel not as happy as these Filipinos?
I do not intend to return to the Philippines unless I am needed there. If my return will start a civil war, the answer is no.
So what would it take for you to go back to the Philippines?
What do you think? It would be a call by the people themselves. I don't intend to go there voluntarily offering my services and insisting that I be president.
But it never happened. I mean, you know, there was never a moment, there was never a time when we thought he was actually going to leave. I mean, you know, or be allowed to go back to the Philippines.
After many attempts to move to another country failed, the Marcoses remained in Hawaii until Ferdinand's death in 1989 at the age of 72.
Imelda Marcos was wrapping up an interview yesterday when she got the call. There was another crisis. Her husband's heart had stopped. Imelda went rushing to St. Francis Hospital.
So much to be done in all fronts, for country, for your home, for your needs, for your health.
By the time she got to St. Francis, Ferdinand Marcos was on an internal pacemaker. His condition seemed to stabilize, raising the possibility that he would once again rally. But as the evening wore on, hope began to dim. Doctors said kidney and lung failure and a widespread infection added to the cardiac arrest that led to Marcos's death. That came shortly after the arrival from California of Marcos's son, Ferdinand Jr., who's known as Bong Bong.
When Bong Bong arrived, I think he felt that his son was there, so he opened his eyes. And after opening his eyes, that was it. His accomplishments are beyond imagination. As I said, I am very sure every Filipino, they might not realize it now, but I'm very sure every Filipino will say that President Marcos was the greatest president, and history will prove this.
And, you know, she carried herself, you know, I guess like the way Jackie Kennedy did after the president died, you know, American president Kennedy died, you know. She just held her level to that standard, and more so after he died. And you can imagine what was going through her mind and her heart, but she now sort of felt like this is her time to kind of speak for him or to take his place. And she was, you know, she did that.
The president will never leave my heart and will never die as far as I'm concerned. He will always be there. In fact, he will be all the time there. In spirit, of course. But when you have become so intimately involved with another human being, there can never be a separation again.
Good afternoon, it's 12:58. You're on KISS AM Radio. It is true, and a lot of people have been in shock about what has happened over the last 8 to 10 hours.
This radio station is the only one here that caters to Filipinos. And today its switchboards lit up. Some people were angry that the flags at the Philippine consulate will not be flown at half-staff.
Since President Marcos was the sixth president and Aquino was only a senator,
and they did that to Aquino, why can't they do that to ex-President Marcos?
Some say his body should be allowed home.
Can we do something about it, or we cannot do nothing? Here in Hawaii, we cannot do anything about it.
Following his death, President Corazon Aquino would not allow entry of Marcos's remains into the Philippines.
I have always considered only one thing, his wish, and the wish of every Filipino to be buried and led to rest in peace in his motherland.
So much has happened since the death of Ferdinand Marcos less than 24 hours ago. More recently, his body was made available for viewing, as a deluge of reporters was allowed into the Marcos home. Leading the way, Imelda Marcos, still fighting for her husband's right to return to the Philippines.
How can you find this man, dangerous man, to security when he is now resting in peace forever?
Imelda Marcos now stands alone against criminal charges for allegedly looting her country of billions. She will vindicate herself, she says, once she resolves the long-standing issue of whether Marcos's body can return to his homeland.
This is so cruel, so inhuman, and so immoral.
His rule changed our country beyond recognition. In what ways he changed it, I leave to others and to history to describe.
But when I came to Manila, I had an interview with President Aquino. And I never forget this. I said, I can't remember everything, but I remember, how can you not allow him to come back? I mean, if he's already deceased, what's the big deal? That was my question. And she was very strong and said, basically, dead or alive, if he returns, it will create upheaval in our country. And I have to be aware of that. And I went, oh, okay. Because that's how strong Marcos was. And she knew it, and she wasn't gonna, she wasn't gonna make light of it. So she said, basically, no, I'm not gonna let him come back.
He not only stole and killed and did all those nasty things, robbing the country blind, but he let down a whole country that had, for a long time, experience with democratic institutions. So he was a classic dictator in that sense. And, he got his due deserts when he was overthrown, and he died in obscurity.
Still, the world wanted to know what happened to the money, and would the Marcoses be held accountable? Imelda Marcos would face a highly publicized trial in New York City on charges that she raided the country's treasury and invested the money in the United States. She was acquitted.
It is the most publicized return to the Philippines since General Douglas MacArthur's during World War II.
Marcos, how are you feeling? Very excited and very happy.
Imelda Marcos.
You're not afraid? No.
And her entourage are leaving New York. Where are you going this morning? What's your schedule?
To the airport.
But it's not that simple.
Bye-bye, Mr. Marcos. Bye-bye.
You've been through so much in this country. What should we think of Imelda Marcos?
I think now that they're starting to see the real Imelda, what is in my heart, not only the packaging outside. When I was deprived of country and everything, people started to relate to the real me.
Be careful. Be careful.
Careful with the ground.
Not the symbol, but the real Imelda.
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us.
I am truly very grateful this country for making me real.
It was a long flight, and we all thought about the same thing. What was it going to be like when we landed? I think I'm going to get blown up in this plane with her. And no, we didn't. The whole airport was filled with their supporters.
Keep going, keep moving, keep moving.
Just like General MacArthur, Imelda Marcos has returned. She is fighting her own war for the hearts and minds of Filipinos.
We love Imelda. Yeah. Always.
The same Filipinos who threw her out of the country 5 years ago.
The Marcoses stole money from the Filipinos?
Yeah, sure. He stole the money. Stole the money? No.
And while she is delighted to face the crowds in the streets, she also must face charges in court.
Kung down daw sa New York, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere.